Did it, the books, the bid it, the books, the did it, the books, books.
All right, welcome back to I'll Read It Eventually. I just got back from vacation the other day and went to South Carolina, which, oddly enough, has a huge number of little free libraries. And so, of course, here we are. Um, I was surprised, like I said, by the number of little free libraries and also by the kinds of books you can find in them. Down there. I have looked at a lot of little free libraries near where I live, and I gotta say that the pickings are pretty slim here in the great state of Kentucky, at least to all the ones that I've looked into. And I look into pretty much any one that I pass. I'm like, oh, what's going on there, and check it out. Most of them are just there's just not much going on, and I don't even mean like, oh, there's nothing that I haven't seen. There's a bunch of stuff I haven't seen. It's just that a lot of it is clearly just not good. It's like James Patterson novels, which, I mean, if that's your thing, fine. But like, there's like 30 of them, and it's like, okay, well, I don't want to read any of that. And then there's some self help, and I don't want that. And that's pretty much it. And probably some romance novels or a few like kids' board books. And I'm like, none of this is for me. Right? Um, so I was pleasantly surprised, all that to say, on vacation to find these five books in in little free libraries in North and South Carolina. Some of these, let's see, two of them are from Asheville, North Carolina, but the other three from South Carolina. So weird to find them, or surprising to me to find them, but happy to have done so. So first two are from Asheville, North Carolina. This is Rome by, I think it's Mikhail Rostovtzeff. Let's see. It says on the back here. Nope. Well, Michael, but Mikhail. Michael Ivanovich Rostovtseff. Rostovtseff. It's a weird name. Anyway, this is his history of the Roman Empire. It's really short, even with text, which is relatively small. Still very short. I think the whole book is less than 300 pages. Little over 320. Um, but everything from I think the third century BC until the fall of the Western Empire. So a really long time frame. I mean, that's like 900 years or so in total. I think he actually kind of abbreviates everything from Romulus to the 5th century AD. So a really long time, more than 1,000 years. Um, but he abbreviates it. He's obviously, by his name, you can tell he is a Russian author. Um, so this is translated, I believe, into English. Um, but this was for a long time kind of a standard text in classes, college classes about Roman history. Um, and I did not know this, but it is volume two of a series called A History of the Ancient World. Um, so I believe the first one is about the Greek world, and then this obviously is about Rome. And I believe they're both by him. I'm not certain of that, but I believe that the other one is by him as well. So as I've said before on this channel, I can't really resist books about Rome. This is not one that I was familiar with, but I read a little bit of it after I picked it up, and it's great. And as I said several times in that episode about Edward Gibbon's decline and fall of the Roman Empire, he references Gibbon because you can't write about the Roman Empire without referencing Edward Gibbon, even if you're going to just dismiss him. You still have to say, yeah, Gibbon was wrong. So, makes my point. The second one is another book that is just incredibly up my alley, and that is a book called Birdwalk Through the Bible by Virginia Holmgren. I love birds. I haven't talked about that at length on this channel yet, but I love birds. And so to find a book that combines birds and the Bible is pretty cool. My understanding is that she kind of goes through the Bible and attempts to sort of talk about every bird that seems to be named. It seems like there's a couple of chapters at the beginning here which are like essays about birds and the Bible. And then following that is a glossary of words about birds in the Bible, including different types of birds. So this is just a page from the bee section. You have birds of the ark, see dove and pigeon and then raven. Birds of the hills, mountains. She gives you the Hebrew term for that, tells you where you can find it in the Bible, gives a little bit of an explanation. Definition might be the wrong word, but a little bit of an explanation. And then she has the word bittern, which is a specific type of water bird. Gives the Hebrew word for it, what that means, tells you where you can find it in the Bible, and then explains what kind of birds the Bible specifically seems to be talking about within that broader category of bitterns. The next one is bustard, which is a hilarious name for a bird. Yeah, so like seems like an exhaustive study of biblical words. And so I don't think it's the kind of book that you necessarily read cover to cover. But I think there are sections of it that you read every page. So, yeah, I saw that it was called that and I just could not pass it up. So, and she is exactly who you think she is. Look at her. Just a nice old lady with some binoculars looking for some birds, singing hymns. Incredible. The next three were in little libraries in South Carolina. This one is a book that I've been looking for a long time, actually. It's a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Not because it's hard to find, just because I wanted a good copy of it. And here we are with an Oxford World Classics copy of it. So I've heard a lot of great things about this book, and it is exactly what the title suggests. A Connecticut Yankee from the time of Mark Twain finds his way back to the 7th century in Britain. So should be a rollicking good time. Another book that I have been looking for quite a while is Count Belisarius by Robert Graves. This is a book about the Byzantine Empire. It is a novel, but much like some of the historical fiction that I think is the best, very closely researched. Graves is a classicist, among other things. His most famous work is probably I, Claudius, about the Roman Emperor Claudius, and it is a telling of the life of Claudius in the Julio-Claudian dynasty from inside Claudius's head. And Claudius, well, I don't have time to go into it, but Claudius he's an interesting person to pick because many people at the time thought that he was slow. They thought that he might actually be developmentally disabled. And Graves takes the tack that, in fact, Claudius played up some genuine disabilities he had, but most all of them were physical problems rather than mental. And so Claudius pretends to be developmentally slow because people think that he is, and he uses that as a defense mechanism in the book to keep himself from being like stabbed to death or poisoned, which is a genuine concern in the early Roman Empire. And so Claudius comes out of it as this very intelligent person, in Graves' telling. And I think he probably really was very intelligent. Well, I know he was, but whether or not he pretended to be less developed than he was is an open question. But Graves basically says that he was such an astute political operator that he was like, if I act like I'm dumb, no one will think I'm a threat. And that's essentially how he survived and eventually became the emperor of Rome, is because he basically pretended to be something he wasn't until he was in the right place at the right time. And then there he was at the reins of power. Um, Graves is a really excellent author. I, Claudius is a great book. It's a lot shorter than this one. It's a great book, really highly detailed. I would say if you're going to try and jump into a Robert Graves novel, you need to know something about the historical period he's writing about, because he just kind of assumes that you do. And yeah, if you don't, you can really struggle. When I read I, Claudius for the first time, I didn't know very much about the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and as a result, I was kind of lost. There are a lot of characters with the same or very similar names in Roman culture. That's just a facet, an aspect of Roman culture, and so it made it very difficult to read, or somewhat difficult, because there were a lot of people who had the same or very similar names, and Graves just assumed that you knew who was who. Um, which, if you're a student of the time, is not a big deal. But if you're not, or if you're not yet, it makes things harder. So Belisarius is a very famous figure in Byzantine history. He's a Roman, well, Byzantine, not really a Roman, but a Byzantine general, who reconquered a substantial portion of the western half of the Roman Empire in the, I believe, the 6th and 7th centuries. Um, yeah, I think that's the right time frame. Um, under the Emperor Justinian. That's gotta be right. Hold on. Yep, in perfect form, the book doesn't say. I'm almost certain it's the reign of the Emperor Justinian. I know it. Almost certain his wife's name is Theodora, who's mentioned here. Yeah, we're gonna go with that. And if I'm wrong, there'll be a little note that says that I was wrong. In the video description. Oh, excuse me. Oh my gosh. Um, so I, Claudius is great. Graves also wrote a autobiography about his experiences in the First World War called Goodbye to All That, which is also excellent, supremely well written. Just a great book. Very different subject matter, obviously. Deeply, deeply sad, because as with so many people of that generation, so many young men, he lost a number of friends during the First World War, and obviously was himself deeply affected by what he experienced. That is, when the book is titled Goodbye to All That, because he's essentially saying goodbye to all of his innocence and all the things he used to believe about the world, because he realizes that they're all kind of nice, pious fictions, and that the world is often a very sad and dirty and dangerous place. So, yeah. But I know he's a great author, and I know that Count Belisarius will be fantastic. Um, the last book that I picked up, and again, these are from little free libraries. So I do, the ones around here just not that high quality. So I was very surprised to find some of these things. Um, this last one is a book that I actually saw in a YouTube video and was like, oh, that'd be a cool book to have, because it would replace a number of volumes that I have. And the book in question is the collected dialogues of Plato. This is a specific version of this, Bowling in series from Pantheon Books. And this is a collection of the dialogues. If you're not familiar with the dialogues are essentially all that remains of the philosophy of Plato. Um, and it's a weird relationship. So if you're not aware, um, sorry, just trying to get the dust jacket back on. So the three sort of greats of Greek philosophy are Socrates, his student Plato, and Plato's student Aristotle. And those are sort of the three big names in Greek philosophy, three monumental figures who reshaped the thinking of the Western world. So there are philosophers who came before Socrates. There are quite a few of them, in fact. Today, all of those philosophers are lumped into one group, and they are called the pre-Socratics, because I heard someone describe this recently. The pre-Socratics basically had a long, ongoing discussion between, is everything made out of one thing, or is everything made out of a bunch of things? And Socrates said, you're both wrong. It's something else. And he offered what at the time was a very unique explanation for the nature of everything, right? Um, in its simplest terms. I think I mentioned this in another video, but it was the one on Gibbon's Decline and Fall. Um, the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead is famous for saying that the history of Western philosophy, or the entirety of Western philosophy, is essentially a series of footnotes to Plato. And that is because Plato collected his own thinking as well as some amount of the thinking of Socrates in what are called dialogues. And they are conversations. These are accounts of almost certainly fictional conversations that take place between groups of people, often focusing on Socrates. Plato uses Socrates as a mouthpiece very often in his dialogues. So Socrates will say something about philosophy, which is probably, at least according to some scholars, which is probably more Plato's beliefs than Socrates, but he's using Socrates saying it to give it some weight, right? There are cases in which some scholars would say, no, that seems to be a Socratic idea that's being said right there. And Plato is saying, oh, I agree with that. Or here's Socrates giving his idea, and then there's another character who gives a Platonic thought, or just another thought entirely from some other perspective or something like that. Um, and the dialogues are a really interesting way for the philosopher Plato to work through philosophical questions, because each of the dialogues basically says, okay, here's a concept, right? So one of the more famous ones, which I believe is collected in here, because I think it is in the form of a dialogue. Let's see. Yes. So the Republic is one of Plato's most famous works, but it is done in the form of a dialogue. And so the question that kicks off the dialogue that becomes the Republic is, what is justice, right? And so each of the dialogues are concerned with a fundamental ideal. What is justice? What is the true goal of life? What is a philosopher for? What is love? What is knowledge? I mean, all these sorts of big things, but they are boiled down to a conversation between friends, right? And so often Socrates will be driving the conversation and he'll start asking people questions. Somebody will make an assertion, right? They'll say, oh, well, a just society would not have blah, 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 blah. And Socrates will be like, so you think that, a just society, a just society wouldn't have poor people, that wouldn't be a thing. And Socrates will ask some question like, oh, so you think that, in a just society, we would kill all the poor people? And, then the guy's like, oh, well, that's not what I mean at all. No, 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 no. We wouldn't kill them all. Well, we'd do something else to get rid of poverty. And Socrates is quite famous for this. This is actually, at least according to Plato, it's why they killed him. He asks questions until people have come around to the truth, basically. And that was a bad example I gave just now. But essentially, someone will make an assertion and he'll ask them, okay, well, based on the logical consequences of what you just said, what you mean is, whatever follows from that. And then the person will realize, like, oh, no, that can't possibly be what I mean because that puts me in a silly position. Or it turns out that can't be what I mean because that's the opposite of what I think. And so Socratic dialogues, Plato's works here, are a way of working out the consequences of ideas until someone arrives at truth. And for Plato, that's like the fundamental idea of his system, is there is such a thing as absolute truth. There is such a thing as objective truth. Plato believes in something called the world of forms, and basically all of reality is a reflection of a non-physical spiritual reality in which there is a perfect form of something, right? So when I was in college, the philosophy TA that was teaching me about this said somewhere there is the perfect form of a chair, right? And it is the fundamental nature of chairness. It's just floating out there in the ether as a form, the form of a chair, the fundamental chairness, right? It is the most chair of chairs. It is the perfect idea, concept, being of a chair. And in Platonic thought, you have that, right? The form of a chair. And then there's this barrier between the physical world and the perfect ideal. And within the physical world, you have the idea of a chair, because Plato's going to say, well, the way you could imagine a chair to be is often, almost always, going to be better than the actual chair, right? Because you can imagine something, or you can think of something and then not be able to achieve it physically, right? And so your ideas are actually a higher level of reality in many cases than physical reality, right? Because physical reality can often fail to meet expectations or not measure up to ideals, right? And chair is a bad example for that, but think, for instance, of love, right? Your idea of what love is, or your ability to imagine or picture love or its consequences, often far exceeds the actual love that you experience or give in reality itself, right? In lived physical reality. And so for Plato, you have physical reality itself, right? Chairs in their multiplicity, ideas of chairs that people have or can imagine, and then beyond the physical realm, you have the ideal form of chairness. And so Plato's dialogues seek to capture, unlock that fundamental form of something. That is what a lot of them are really about, is what do we mean when we say justice? What do we mean when we say love? What do we mean when we say knowledge, or whatever it is? And these, they take various forms. They're told as scenes. Stories is the wrong word, but scenes. Um, so, for instance, there's a famous one, and I can't remember what it's called now, but fans of Plato will know immediately, where somebody is trying to say that they're talking about the nature of knowledge and what people know, and somebody says, "Oh, well, people don't know anything. We have to learn everything. It's all external to us." And Socrates says, "Well, that can't be right. You don't know anything until something else shows it to you. That can't be the case." And so they, quite famously, they bring a slave boy in, and he's an uneducated youth, right? And Socrates, basically, he draws a triangle on the ground, and then he walks the kid through figuring out the measurement of the angles and everything and the lengths of the sides without giving him any of that information himself. He just basically shows in the discussion with this kid who's uneducated, you actually already knew all of the stuff to do with this triangle. Socrates didn't tell you any of it. It was in your head or within you the whole time. It had to be unlocked or drawn out, right? And so it speaks to some of the ideas that may have been Plato's about the nature of education, the nature of knowledge. Um, but that is part of one of the dialogues where he's having this conversation with this kid, and he's saying, "All right, well, you know, these two angles here, can they be greater than that one? If the triangle is an enclosed three-sided space, right?" And the kid will be like, "Well, no, it can't be bigger than that because then it wouldn't be enclosed, right? Or it wouldn't be three sides or whatever." And so it's a really interesting idea, because it's like, okay, well, where does your knowledge come from? What does education do? Does it impart something new, or does it draw out something internal? Um, the symposium, I forget. I think they're talking about love in the symposium. Um, but the symposium is a drinking party. They all get progressively more and more drunk over the course of the conversation, just absolutely hammered, as they're trying to discuss, what is the true nature of love. I believe it's love. And not all of them arrive at, a stopping point. Some of them, I think the Symposium is one that doesn't actually like get to a, hey, we all agree on what love is, and this is the answer. There are a couple arguments presented, but I don't know if it actually lands. And so for some of them, I'm not sure that Plato would say, oh, here's fundamentally what this is, um, but here's what this may be. So, um, but like I said, the reason I was looking for this is because I knew that it would replace a number of things in my library, some that I have read and some that I haven't. Um, but these are all collected in one place. And so I don't have to figure out what I have and what I don't. Because you can very easily I remember buying in college. Um, there are printings of, three of these dialogues together. There's a famous set of five, I think it's five, which have to do with the trial and death of Socrates. Because he's put on trial for essentially corrupting the youth and atheism. Atheism in the ancient Greek sense, which means you don't believe in all the gods, you just believe in a god. Um, and so there are a set of dialogues that are sort of about the end of his life. Um, and those five are often printed together. And then there are others that are, printed by themselves or printed with, one or two others. So if you're going to get all of Plato, you're often going to end up with like three of the same dialogue, but spread across three different books because they're parts of different sets. And so this is just a much better way to have Plato than to have 15 different books that reproduce all of it, but replicate a bunch of stuff. Is just to have one big one. If you're a big Plato scholar or something like that, it makes sense to have multiple translations or things like that. But I'm not. That's not me. Um, I can only read a little bit of philosophy at a time, and then I have to stop because um, some of it I'm like, oh, that's super cool. It's really great. And then other parts of it I'm like, this is dumb. Why are we even talking about this? Um, so, no chance am I going to sit down and read this entire book in one sitting. But yeah, this book is. Well, those were notes. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So it's like 1,500 pages. So I'm not going to sit down and read this in one go, but I might sit down and read, a dialogue or one of his essays, and call it a day. So those are the books I got on vacation. Some good ones, I think. I'm excited, particularly about Count Belisarius. Um, and you may see a video on that one soon. So, um, those are the ones that I picked up. And, of course, once again, forgot to make the chart before I did this. So, I'm going to go do that now. But here is the chart. All right. So, after looking, I dropped down to 723. These take me to 728. But we're moving in the right direction because I am almost done with the book again right now. So that is all I have to say on the subject of shopping the shelf for now. We're going to get there. I might have to stop taking free books. That's going to be really hard. Not buying them is hard. Not taking free ones is going to be really hard. But more on that next time.